Welcome back, everybody. This time we're going to be discussing the 1902 Nobel Prize in Physics, which was shared by these two gentlemen, Lorentz and Zeeman. They were both physicists who worked late 1800s, early 1900s, and won the prize as a joint prize in 1902. Basically, one of them explained what the other one had done in a very compelling way, but they both contributed to something that was very sort of similar. So they decided it was a split prize that year. Um, the prize was given away for recognition of the extraordinary service they rendered by their researches into the influence of magnetism upon radiation phenomena. Now, that's the Nobel Prize Committee's official statement. I'm going to translate all that into English for you. But here on the top is a nice picture of Zeeman standing next to somebody you may recognize with the funky hair. And at the bottom is Lorentz sitting right next to that same gentleman. By the way, the other side of Lorentz is Madame Curie. So that picture on the bottom is probably one of the more famous ones in physics. There's like 19 future Nobel laureates in it. The prize was taken. Some of them had already won the prize, some of them hadn't, but there's like 19 of them in that picture. That picture will pop up again in other videos because there's just so many people in it that were shockingly important, including Lorentz, Madame Curie, Einstein, others. Now, what did they do? So Lorentz came up with the idea of this thing called the Lorentz force, and he proved that it existed because he basically showed that the combined electric and magnetic forces could act on a charged particle in a magnetic field. And what that lets them do is kind of move around in a predictable way. Because if you change that electromagnetic field a little bit, you can change the behavior of the charged particle, but you can change it in a very predictable way based on what that charged particle is traveling through. All that will make more sense in a minute. But the picture on the top, you will see that you see is a picture of a charged particle in a bubble chamber. So it's actually an image of kind of what goes on with some scientific writing on it to kind of help figure a few things out. Don't worry about all that for the moment. Going to make more sense in a minute. The Zeeman effect is the ability of light to be pulled apart into spectral lines. And what that lets you do is determine what the source of that light is. Did it come from an emission of a carbon filament? Did it come from the emission of a neon sign? Did it come from argon? What caused that light to exist? Because light really does have components. If you've ever seen light coming through a crystal or coming through a prism or coming through a light some days, you'll see that it kind of hits the ground and it kind of turns into a rainbow. Actually, rainbows come from light coming through water. So we owe the understanding of that to this guy named Zeeman. All that actually has practical applications. Both these guys have applications for all this stuff that just sounds like basic goofy science. You're like, okay, who cares? Well, we actually do. The Lorentz force has a couple of applications, including hydrophones. You can detect underwater sound waves. Ultrasounds, you can determine whether or not you're having a baby who's growing correctly, whether or not you're having a boy or girl. Do you have birth defects? All that's thanks to the Lorentz force application of the ultrasound transducer. Electrical impedance tomography, which is a big fancy way of saying image the inside of the human body in a way an X-ray can't, so that you can determine something about the cells you're passing electromagnetic waves to. Are their densities different? Do their densities line up with cancer cells? You know, what the heck is going on inside there? Zeeman determined essentially the energy level of atoms in terms of their angular momentum. And what that lets you do is go figure out all kinds of stuff about stars. So you can figure out their temperature, chemical composition, luminosity. Oh, by the way, you can also do an MRI. And without him, you couldn't. So the Zeeman effect is in full display when you go and say, "Hey, do I have brain cancer or not?" And they don't want to carve your head open. They run an MRI, and next thing you know, you get a really nice picture of your brain, and you can tell what's going on inside there. Um, Lorentz wasn't done, right? When he did that stuff, he was not finished by any stretch of the imagination. After he did the work that won the Nobel Prize, he made significant contributions in dynamics and relativity, to special relativity, to general relativity. Einstein had nothing but really good things to say about this guy, and Einstein was of course Einstein. But the 1953 quote is the one that kind of stood out to me. Einstein said, "For me personally, he meant more than all the others I have met on my life's journey." So Lorentz gave Einstein sort of some ideas and directions to go with his work in a way that nobody else did. So very important guy to science. Everybody's heard of Einstein. Lots of people have heard of Madame Curie, which is fantastic, and we'll get to her contributions later. But without this guy, Einstein, might not have had the jumping off points that he had, because he was basing a lot of work on the work Lorentz had done. Maybe Einstein would have gotten there anyway, but he had somebody else's work to look at and go, hey, yeah, well, let's extend that, let's extend that, let's take that out further. Which is why a future physicist named his book On the Shoulders of Giants, because what physicists do is we learn from those that came before us and we try to build onto that knowledge base. And we're lucky that we really do get to stand on the shoulders of some of the giants like Lorentz and, Einstein and Newton and others. Fantastic people to have built a foundation for us to kind of figure out the rest of it. Zeeman wasn't finished either. Now, Zeeman, who you can also see in that picture right there, standing right next to Einstein again, um, was not done with his spectral lines. He wanted to use them for something else. So he started working on experiments involving gravitation. Now, gravitation, we all know what it is. We go out, we drop something, it falls, we take it, we go, whoop, whoop, gravity works, right? Why does gravity work? Exactly what causes gravity? Exactly what are the numbers of how fast something falls? Those, we know the numbers, we know what it does. Even to this day, we know exactly what it does. Why are two things attracted to one another like that? That's still an open question that people are kind of arguing over. As soon as I say that, somebody's going to go, oh, yeah, well, this guy over here has a theory about warp space time. I get it. There are absolute theories. There are a number of people out there going in slightly different directions about gravity, whether it's warp to space time, whether it's loopy, whether all kinds of questions about it. But those are things that are still not really answered. And people say, well, why do we care about all this quantum loop this or gravitational lensing that? Who cares? Well, it could be the secret to deep space travel, right? It could be the secret to other things we don't know. Because when these guys, Lorentz and Zeeman, did their work, oh, great! Here's a guy messing around in a bubble chamber. Who cares? Here's a guy who figured out spectral lines, so we can go figure out what's going on inside a sunspot, right? Who cares, right? It's not a real practical application. It's going to affect your and my daily lives. But I think we can agree that MRIs do, and I think we can agree that ultrasounds impact the lives of everybody today. They've had widespread impact. So sometimes when you see these science experiments and these big questions we're trying to answer, it's not necessarily because that's the question we really want an answer to. Well, it is, but there's an application to that somewhere that may not be all that obvious. And in this particular one, I think the application of it may not be incredibly obvious to most people. Scientists look at it and go, "Yay!" But we don't really always explain that stuff very well. So I wanted to take this video series and kind of try to explain why all these basic science things met some future, crazy application that we all know. And without these two guys, MRIs and ultrasounds, I think we can agree those are two really good things. But this is the 1902 Nobel Prize. There's another video on my site for the 1901 Nobel Prize. I'm going to keep doing them until we get to the modern day stuff, some of whom I've met. And maybe I'll try to get one of them to come on because I know a guy at MIT that won the chemistry prize last year, but we'll have to wait till we get to the chemistry prizes for that. But I do know a couple of physics guys, so maybe we'll get some of them to come on and talk for the more recent prizes. But everybody have a great day. Click like, subscribe, or follow wherever you see me. Drop me a line if you have a particular sciencey, goofy question you want to have answered. I'm happy to do that. Everybody have a good one.